it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, it's Ivy Slater, and welcome back to an episode of Her Success Story. Right now, we're actually on a series called the High Performance Series, where we're interviewing leaders who have a background in either sports or the arts, and how that has impacted them as leaders today. I have an amazing guest today that the first time we met, we were going to just do this brief phone call, and it kept going on and on and on because we had so much in common and so much to talk about. And I find Heather Ettinger so amazingly interesting. Heather has devoted more than 25 years to the financial service industry. She specializes in helping clients and their families create strategic financial plans to guide them through life transitions. So anybody who's lived a year, two, maybe three, often goes through various different life transitions. This could be a loss of a spouse, divorce, adding children to your family, job changes, a variety of different things. Heather is widely recognized for her unique experience, expertise, and dedication to helping women build the financial acumen and wealth, culminating in the launch of Luma Wealth Advisors. Heather has also co-authored 2 different studies about women and their unique entitled Women of Wealth. Why do the financial service industry still not hear them? Amazingly perceptive. I could go on and on. Heather's bio's in the show notes. Most importantly, welcome Heather Ettinger. Thank you for being here, and let's just chat here a little bit.
Well, Ivy, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
So before we do all the professional stuff, let's talk about what your background is and what I found fascinating, what your hobby still is today. Share a little bit more with our audience.
Sure. So as a young girl, I was exposed to pretty much girl sports, which I stunk at because they involved grace, which is not in my repertoire. And fortunately, I grew up with 2 older brothers playing sports with them, and ended up going into being a multi-sport athlete in high school, which kind of dramatically changed my self-image. And I fell in love with one sport in particular, which is ice hockey. And I had been a figure skater, but as I said, not a very good one, and but had grown up playing street hockey with my brothers. And so one of my brothers really encouraged me to go out for the women's hockey team. And I did. And I fell in love with the fast pace, the competition, just the excitement of the sport, and ended up playing 4 years in college as well. And then continue to play through today, which is, let's just say, a few decades later.
So you are a ice hockey woman. There's not a lot. First of all, let's premise it by saying, out of the sports out there, there is not that many women ice hockey players.
That would be correct. We were considered pioneers, absolutely, in the sport when we started playing. And really, in the college years, the only places you saw any chance of having a women's team was if they already had a very strong men's program. So it was pretty limited to upper kind of New England. And it wasn't until after the women won gold in the Olympics that the sport actually started to spread through the rest of the country.
So it's interesting because, like, looking along that alignment is playing in a male-dominated world or a field, because we just to date ourselves a little bit, I'll say I have adult children. Heather, your kids are roughly at what point in lives?
So 26, 24, and 21.
So listeners, just so you know, Heather and I on a background are in the same area age-wise. So at the time, the financial industry world was very male-dominated. And I would think your background in hockey kind of gave you that, I hate to say it, were you used to playing you said you had brothers, you used to playing in a boys' world?
Well, I think hockey really prepared me well for that. And I will also say, I went to Dartmouth College not that long after it went co-ed. So that probably also prepared me as well. But I think hockey in particular, and I think in two ways, Ivy. Number one, yes, playing a sport that was considered a men's sport, really, you want to talk about an icebreaker. That was an icebreaker and immediately commanded some respect from the men. And I will say that I'm not physically that big, so it was also a little bit surprising. I often say what people shouldn't underestimate is that women can be mini but mighty. And
I like
I think
that. Women can be mini but mighty.
Exactly.
That's a writer down, or that's a quotable.
Yes, that is a quotable, and I think it's really important. And I think also, when I got into the sport, as I said, it was right after Title IX. We got hand-me-down equipment from the men, and you might imagine some of that equipment didn't fit very well. So you want to talk about kind of playing in a man's world. We also were playing with men's equipment other than our skates and our sticks, which we could cut down to our height. But we had their gloves, which, most men have a hand like twice the size of mine. And you kind of learn to make do, right? And I think that served me well going into a very male-dominated world of, hey, you're going to have grit and get through with whatever you got.
So I find it, so listeners, just so you guys know, when Heather and I connected, and I learned that Heather was a hockey player. Not that I'm a hockey player. My husband was a hockey player when he was younger until the boys got way bigger than him, and is a huge New York City Ranger fan. Now my kids have become major Ranger fans. So I acquired the sport through the family. And, the funny thing is our very first date in New York City is I took him to the Met to see a Manet exhibit, and he took me to a Ranger game that night to introduce me to his world.
That's a great combination.
Isn't it? So with that, so hockey is a demanding sport. It's a physical sport. It's a sport of high intensity endurance. Anything I'm missing here?
Well, I think it's a sport that my husband often says actually is probably, in terms of skills, one of the most demanding sports, because you have to have, as you said, you got to be in fabulous, not just aerobic shape, but anaerobic shape, because you're sprinting. And you have to have very good hand-eye coordination. You've got to have great balance. You have to have flexibility. So it's a very demanding sport from that standpoint. And I can tell you by when I don't play for a couple weeks, I think it uses just about every muscle in your body, because they all hurt if you don't keep working on them.
So what brought you, so in moving from college, et cetera, you were hunkered in New England. What brought you into the financial service world? I mean, where did that career get defined from?
So, my dad actually was in the financial services world. And when I came out of college, I had tried a number of different jobs. I'd been very fortunate to work both domestically and overseas in financial services and in many different areas. And truthfully, I came out of college and with some coaching said, okay, I want to go into trading as my first entree into the business. Again, picking something like hockey that was very exciting, very fast-paced, very kind of moment-to-moment, competitive, which falls with my personality set. And I actually picked Boston because I wanted a major financial city where my father had no connections, because we were extremely close. And with me going into the same industry, I wanted to develop my own reputation, and where I could play hockey. And it was pretty limited in the early 80s as to where I would be able to continue the sport that I loved.
And, I love the fact that you said, you were so, first of all, you were so clear. So although that you were ready to step into the professional world, that hockey wasn't ready to be let go, that it was going to come with you, that it was still part of what identified you as a human being.
Without a doubt. And I think, when I was preparing for this, one of the things that I really realized is that not only did hockey dramatically change, if you will, my body image. So I went from feeling like the girl to all of a sudden feeling like an athlete, which is truthfully, it's a feeling of more strength. And it also changed my self-image. So I saw myself now in a very different light as a player, so to speak, in whatever I was walking into. And so had a lot more confidence around both kind of my inner strength, my outer strength, but also in terms of what I could do. If I could play hockey and go through all the challenges of it from a physical standpoint, and keeping in mind I'm also not the biggest person, but and just that work that I put into being a part of a successful team and being a successful player on that team, the lessons learned from that as you walk into kind of any job, and particularly a job that was demanding, competitive, et cetera, really carried over and really helped me get my mind around the fact that I was entering into something that was going to be a very competitive marketplace and, quite frankly, still filled with a lot of discrimination, and I was going to need the grit to kind of get through that.
So it's also interesting. So you decided to go into the same field as your father, but you're like, okay, I don't want to move where anybody knows my father. I want to create my own identity. Share a little bit more about that, because it usually is a hell of a lot easier if we leverage our relationships, our connections. Sometimes it's different though when it's family.
I think that's very true. My dad was brilliant. He's since passed, but absolutely brilliant. He had a very strong personality, and I knew that if I came back here, I'd be in his shadow. And another thing you kind of, learn about being on any team is, what is your individual strength, and then what's your role on the team. And so for me to really understand who I was in the financial services industry, I needed to go do it without the being overshadowed by my dad. And so, truthfully, he and I had an agreement he would never ask me to come home. And ironically, by going to Boston and seeing his business from the outside in, and truthfully also having quite a bit of success on my own so that I had headhunters after me and I could kind of write my ticket wherever I wanted to go, that's what brought me back to Cleveland to join his firm. And I'm very, very thankful for that experience, because I think too often people do ride the coattails. Now, in the same breath, I will tell you, don't be fooled. He also did coach me on how to go into informational interviews and how to get the appointment. So I did lever that skill of my dad's, and I did lever some relationships that were through other people that he knew to get the appointments. But I can honestly say when I got the job, it was me that got the job. It wasn't my dad that got the job. And I do think that's important as young people start to develop their own sense of self-confidence and get out there in the world and prove themselves.
So tell me about your business today, where you are in business today.
So my father was an entrepreneur, and truthfully, his father was too. And I realized in my career that I very much am as well. So when I came back to Cleveland, I joined, obviously, a business with him, and I actually had two brothers in the business. And I quickly thought about, what am I going to do that's different? And at the time, it was predominantly an investment management firm. We've we've since very much evolved to the advice side of the business and wealth management. But I started, what I discovered was that women were extremely underserved in this industry, mostly because it was male-dominated and very condescending and a lot of jargon. And I also connected with some female entrepreneurs and philanthropists. And what they taught me was that, one, only 6% of national funding was going to programs around women and girls. And number two, that if we educate and empower women around their money, they're the agents of social change. So with those two lessons, I went about building programs for women based on financial literacy and the fact that we could help them kind of gain control, if you will, around their finances. Fast forward, I trademarked a financial literacy program. As you mentioned, I've done thought leadership in this space. And 2 years ago, I launched another brand, which will become a national brand for us, called Luma, L-U-M-A. It's all about transparency, shining a light on the journey that women go through and what's different for them in relationship to their money, how they view money, how they want to use money, human capital and financial capital to help their families and their communities. So it's a very different process that we go about, and that really came from kind of this entrepreneurial spirit that my father had, and me coming back 30 plus years ago, inventing something then, reinventing it several times along the way, and finally launching a whole new business for us as a firm.
So in looking how your background in hockey has impacted you as a leader of your company, where do you see the alignment there? Or do you see the alignment there?
So I think as a leader, and funny enough, when you and I had a pre-call, we also talked about something else we have in common, which is that Miracle is one of our favorite movies ever, about the,
Can you write that to my kids, please?
Yes, I will. We'll make sure they listen to this. So I do think it's one of the best movies ever. And as the visionary for this firm, I actually use it to introduce people to the concepts of the culture of our firm, our leadership style, et cetera. And they all do have a hockey puck on their desk that has our values on it. But probably the biggest message that comes out of that also impacts my style is that when they were building that famous gold medal winning team back in 1980, and these were all amateurs, they weren't professional athletes. What Herb Brooks did was he didn't pick the best technical players in the country. He picked the players that would come together as the best team. Now, they still obviously had to have very strong individual technical skills, but you have to have chemistry too. And you and I talked about this both in theater and also in sports. And that's how I basically lead the firm as the captain of the firm, if you will. You have to work with people that are different from you, that have complementary skills. I work with a lot of analytics who are very detail-oriented. And as a visionary, that would not be my strength, but it's really important to have those players, if you will, on my team. Right. I think the second thing I really learned as a leader is you need coaching at every level. So even though I may be in, the most senior role in the firm, that doesn't mean that I don't still need coaching and I don't still need to learn. And I've done something more recently where I'm actually reverse mentoring a Hispanic woman to learn more about that culture, which is, by the way, the fastest growing culture of wealth in our country, but also our future workforce. And so, we all can use coaching, and often you got to look more broadly for where you can continue to work on those skills and gaps. I think, being competitive absolutely is part of my leadership style, but I hope it's in a good way. And I want to have, both, if you will, the best clients for our firm and be competitive that way. And I also want to have the best teammates. And so, talent attraction is about being competitive. It's about creating great culture. It's about really thinking in a forward way about the future of your employees and what they're going to want and where their growth is going to come from. And then I'd say, the last way it impacted me as a leader is this kind of grit and gratitude. The strength that you got to have from continuous improvement and being a problem solver, because you're gonna hit barriers, you're gonna hit challenges along the way. And then gratitude. I think, celebrating success is really important. We often talk here about the gap and the gain. We're quick to look at gaps.
Okay, slow down here, because I want you to I want you to be a little bit more. I want everybody to catch this. Talking about the gap and the gain. That's GAP and the GAIN. Okay, so because we're going really fast, but this is a really integral point that everybody gets.
Okay. So I think the gap and the gain is an important perspective, because as leaders, I think we often look at where the gaps are, the skills we need to work on or how you need your people to improve. But equally important, sometimes even more important, is the gain. What has the team accomplished? Celebrating the acquisition of additional skills, celebrating the wins, celebrating even the personal victories for family or the personal life changes in terms of weddings or having children. And I think those are really important things to do as a leader. And it's certainly the combination of the two, but we're often quick to look at the gap. And I think it's really important to look at the gain and have those celebrations on a continual basis.
I think that's so important. And I find it's so easy to be hypercritical. And I find women more so than men to be hypercritical about what's, as you're referring to the gap, what's not working, where do we need to improve? What do we have to do next? Where do we have to go? And it's when at the completion of a winning game, the team celebrates.
Right.
Period.
Right.
At the completion of a show, there's a cast party, a celebration. Now, that doesn't mean the team, the coaches, etc., don't go in the next morning and might watch some film on a game or do some evaluation of but everybody stops and celebrates. Yet in business, things go well, we rush on to the next. Things will go well, we see, well, we should have, what happens if we did this smarter next time? We're very hypercritical. And if we let that go a little bit and actually stop and embrace that celebration component, where can we gain then?
Right. And I think where you see it show up with women most often is you give a woman a compliment and she immediately runs to the confessional and says, oh, but, I've had these shoes for 10 years. So Ivy says, oh, I love your shoes. And I say, yeah, but I've had them for 10 years. Like that makes them less than. So I often stop my women and say, recognize and say, thank you. Yep. Like I just gave you a compliment. And then I think the other way it needs to show up in business is to your point, Ivy. So if, for example, for us, if we gain incremental business from an existing client, that isn't as important of a celebration because that's a validation that they like what we're doing as winning over the new client. But I think so often companies only celebrate the new client. Yeah. And I think we've really tried to work hard here to say, wait, celebrating that incremental business, celebrating that way to go, by the way, also recognizes the rest of the members on the team. I often get credit because I'm a leader on a team and we get the glory. But how important is it for me to recognize the people that are actually doing the bulk of the hard work day to day, the client service managers, all those different people. And that's where it really comes into play as you're running a business. And that recognition is critical because there's often too much recognition of your stars and not enough recognition of the people that are actually working hard to make them look good.
And, you know, your star can't be a star without hydration, right? Especially for looking at hockey, and we're talking about that, you know, how strength, aerobic flexibility, etc., sprinting. And one of the key things is in playing in a game that's as intense as ice hockey, you're constantly hydrating. Interestingly enough, can our stars be our stars without somebody getting us that hydration? And they're as equally in that game as the star. And
absolutely. You can't do it without the team. And you can't do it, as we talked about earlier, without the array of skills on the teams. You don't want me handling your paperwork. Would not be good at it.
Me neither, actually.
But that is critical to having a successful transition for a client.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's so critical to have all these different members on the team with different skill sets, but also with the opportunity to shine and be recognized for the fact that their role on the team is really important. And, you know, I've had conversations with employees where I will say, you're a leader. And they'll say, you know, I'm down 3 levels on the org chart. I'm not a leader. I said, oh, yes, you are. You carry the message every single day because you're talking to the clients probably more as a client service manager than most of the senior advisors are. And you're carrying that message with you every day in how you handle them and also just answering their questions. So I think often we think leaders are just the people at the top. And I would argue, I think you have leaders at every level, and it's just a different type of leadership.
I love that.
The unsung heroes, right? You got to have the unsung heroes.
Absolutely. So final question, any tips or advice for the leaders today who are stepping into larger and larger leadership roles tomorrow?
Well, I think there are a couple of different things that they really need to focus on. Number one is, and I know this sounds really basic, but as you're preparing for sports the same way, you got to prepare and you got to walk in with intention for every discussion. What do you want to get out of it? What are the messages you want to deliver? And stay really focused on that. But also keeping a lens of what do they want to get out of it. And sometimes we're a little quick when we want to move up the rungs on the ladder to be focused on what we want, but how are you going to help them accomplish what they want to accomplish? And I think that's a really important piece as you start to move up in the organization. I think a second is really understanding both your role as an individual player, if you will, you know, what your skill sets are, but then also your role on the team and how you interface with the team. We have an expression around here, you know, own your own behavior. If you are a negative Nelly, you're not going to get real far. But if you're somebody who is, even if it's not necessarily your area, but you're a person who wants to jump in, roll up your sleeves, and find solutions to help your teammates, that's going to help you also move up the ladder. So I think understanding your role on the team and the impact that you can have on the team, both in the big ways, of course, but also in the day-to-day ways is really important. And then, as I said, you know, just really understanding what you need in terms of training or in terms of coaching to get to the next level, and being open-minded to that. We all need to improve, and just, maybe looking for some non-traditional ways to get it. You can have a group of friends that maybe give you really candid feedback, as opposed to the friends who just, want to support you no matter what. My best friend is probably, my best advocate, because she'll tell me what I want to hear, but she'll also often tell me things that I don't necessarily want to hear but should hear. And I think that's really, really important. So surrounding yourself with people who are going to give you candid, good advice, question you, push you in a way that's constructive, obviously, because they understand you. And I think those, in my mind, as you're moving up, are probably the most critical elements.
Love it. Well, Heather, thank you for joining me here today for the High Performance series, and for being the high performance woman you are. First of all, great admiration that you're still playing hockey. Because that's a dedication, not just to the sport, it's a dedication to keeping yourself at the top of your game in order to be able to do this for all these years. And that's a huge respect for you there.
The top of my game may not be quite as good as it used to be, Ivy, but I do appreciate it. And, again, it's just, this has been a ton of fun, and I love talking about the intersection of sports and women leaders, because I do think it's such an important topic and a lot of lessons that can be carried over.
Thank you. And listeners, you can read more about Heather. Down in our show notes is the full bio. There will be links with how to stay in touch with her, connect to her, reach out to her. She is a leader among leaders. If you have curiosity, don't think about it, take the action. Connect to us. Please feel free to leave a comment. Subscribe to her success story. We will drop in your inbox every Monday morning. You don't have to come looking for us. We will come right to you. Thanks again for being here. Heather, thank you again.
Thank you, Ivy. It's been a pleasure.
Don't need your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.